Welcome back to the TimCo Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. In this video, we're going to deploy our two SQL databases to Azure SQL Databases. That involves first creating those Azure SQL databases and then manually pushing our configurations to the new databases. Then we'll wire up our API to those SQL databases. Now, Patreon members, there won't be any source code with today's video, so you don't need to head over there to get any source code. There is none today. Okay? Now, if you're not familiar with this project, let me explain a bit about it. We created the TimCo Retail Manager application as a set of simulations of the real world. Phase 1 started with a .NET Framework project, or a set of projects, and then they upgraded to .NET Core in order to gain that experience of doing an upgrade like that. We completed that phase in November, and if you want to get up to speed quickly in that phase, there's a link in the description to get that Phase 1 course. We're currently in Phase 2, where we're expanding the application and taking advantage of the development and deployment tools available to us. You see, I'm a firm believer in experience. And by doing this and seeing how it's done and doing it with me, you get some of that initial experience. Then, what I encourage you to do is go do it yourself so you get even more experience and ensure that you really understood what you learned. That's how you grow as a C# developer. Okay, let's head over to Azure. We're going to start by building out our databases. That way they're ready to go when we want to push data to them. So let's create a resource. And we're going to create a SQL database. We're going to start off with our subscription, which is my enterprise subscription. Our resource group, we're going to choose the TimCo resource group, again, to keep those things together that we're creating. The database name, the first one's going to be the TimCo Auth database. And the server, I have a few servers, but none in the in this resource pool or resource group. So let's call this the TimCo database. Let's make sure it's available. It looks like it is. It's still thinking. Oh, nope, it's already in use. So the TimCo SQL. How about that? There we go. TimCo SQL is available. Now let's give it a admin password. That looks good. And we're going to paste in a password, a secure password. And now I'm going to give it a location. The location I want is going to be in the US. I want East 2. And that's close to my API. In fact, it's the same data center. That looks good. That creates my SQL Server for me. But that's just the SQL Server itself. Now you pay per database. So the server is kind of free. But what you do is you pay for the databases on that server. Now again, we could go to defaults, but that's going to be expensive, so we're going to change that. First, though, we have this SQL Elastic Pool. This is great for a small to medium-sized business. Even a large business can take really good advantage of this. It's probably not for the smallest of businesses, but if you have a few databases, this is a really cool option. What it does is instead of saying, here's how many resources I'm going to give to this database, and then here's how many resources I'm going to give to that database, and have kind of these blocks of resources dedicated, one to each resource, and then maybe you don't use those resources very effectively or efficiently. Well, the Elastic Pool says, tell you what, you buy a block of resources, and then you kind of throw your databases in the pool, and they get to share those resources. So if one database is really getting hit hard, it will take more resources that are not being used by the other databases. And then when it's no longer getting hit hard, it releases those resources and now something else could use it. So it's kind of like this give and take that allows you to balance out some of your databases. So if you have a reporting database that maybe only runs during off hours, but when it runs, it really chugs away and it does a lot of work. Well, you could speed that up by putting it in a Elastic Pool, because your main production database isn't getting used that much during those off hours, so your reporting database could use more of those resources, but it wouldn't need it during the day, and therefore it gives it back to your main production database. So really cool option there. We're not going to use that because we don't need to get that big in our databases. We're going with the cheapest database possible. So we're going to hit configure here, no to this, and then hit configure. And this starts off at $231 a month. Now, you may say, man, is that expensive? It's really not. SQL Server is an expensive database hosting option. So if you were to buy this in a real-world business setting, you'd be paying more than that. So this is not that expensive relative to what it could cost you. However, we're going to go back to the basic, standard, and premium sections and go all the way to basic. Basic is 5 DTUs. So a DTU is, I believe, is a data transmission unit, and it's essentially a number that Microsoft kind of makes up. It's based upon your CPU usage and your memory usage and your network usage. I believe the 3 values that are in there. And it basically says, okay, we're going to calculate this DTU. You get 5 of those. Basically, this means that your database isn't going to be screaming fast, probably, but it will operate just fine. And so if you don't have heavy loads, this is just fine for especially testing, but even a very small production application could use this. Now, you could go a standard, which does scale. Notice it starts at 10 DTUs for only $15 a month, but it has a 250 gigabyte limit on the database size versus the 2 gigabyte of this cheap one. But the cool thing is this does expand, so you can just keep going up as you need to. Now, $4,500 a month, that's a lot for a SQL Server, but again, you're getting 3,000 DTUs. So we're going back to basic, $5 a month, $4.99 a month US for East 2 data storage. It may be different in your area, okay? But this is the very cheapest at $5. So I'll hit OK, and then create or review and create. And that all looks good. So we hit create, and this is going to create our first database for us. Now it's going to take a little bit, but once it's done, then we can create our second database, which is the data database. This is the auth database. We're going to create the data database next. So auth is for authorization. Our data is for our applications data. Okay, so that's now deployed. So we'll go ahead and pin that to the dashboard. And now we can go back to the dashboard. We see that auth database. Let's create one more resource. We'll do this one quicker. This is, again, a SQL database. This is going to be in the TimCo resource group. We're going to call this one the TimCo Data. And we'll select the TimCo SQL Database. We're going to don't forget to configure this. Otherwise, your bill will be expensive. So make sure it's the cheap plan, the basic 2 gigabytes of storage and 5 DTUs, which this is amazing. I know that it's not free, but the reality is you're taking up resources. So you are getting server space on Microsoft servers. You're getting transmission for free. You're getting data storage up to 2 gigabytes for free. And you're getting a SQL Server, which this is a production able. Now, it's not a great production, but it's a production able SQL Server. And you're paying $5 a month. That's a really good price. So just note that it is there and it is pretty reasonable. Okay? All right, so that's done. That's a little quicker this time. And we'll go ahead and pin that to the dashboard as well. And now if we go back to the dashboard, we can see we have both TimCo Data and TimCo Auth. So now let's go TimCo Data. And I'm going to go to this set server firewall here. We'll click this, and I'm going to say that I want to add a client IP. Notice that it creates a new rule called client IP address and the date, and it has a starting IP address and ending IP address. That's my actual IP address. So that will allow me to connect to the SQL Server. So by default, no one can connect to your SQL Server. So it kind of locks it down. So by doing this by adding the client IP address, which it's looked up for you, it has allowed you now to access this once you hit save. I also want to turn on the allow Azure services and resources to access the server, basically allowing other Azure applications like our API to talk to the SQL Server. I hit save, and once that's saved, it will now allow me through the firewall. Now I want to show you, let's go back to the dashboard and go to the auth database. We go to same set server firewall. You'll see that my IP address is already there and Azure's turned on. Why is that? Because this is the server firewall. This is not per database, it's per database server. So this is the TimCo SQL database or server. So therefore, every database on the TimCo SQL server now has these rules. Okay, so now I can access these databases from my API. Let's first start by going back to our Visual Studio and publishing our database. Remember, we have this publish location, which right now, if I double click this, it's going to point to, and it's actually not even there. It would point to the local database. The reason it's not there is because I actually cloned it again, and that file's not there because it's not stored in Git. But let's create a new publish profile. So we're going to say publish, and we're going to hit edit, and we're going to say, you know what, I want to browse, go to Azure, and then I have a bunch of databases in Azure, but one of them is the TimCo data for TimCo SQL. And I have to paste in that password. So let's do that. I'm going to paste it in. And I will not remember this password. Remember, the password will store this on my computer. Let's not do that. Let's not store that database or that password. And the database name is TimCo data. That's cool. So let's test connection first, make sure it works. And it did. So now I hit OK. And I'm not going to save this. I'm just going to publish it. This will publish my SQL changes to the server. And it said, oh, no, a project which specifies SQL Server 2016 as the target cannot be published to Azure SQL Database version 12. How do you fix that? Right-click on data, go to properties, and let's change the target platform to the Azure SQL Database. Now it said SQL Database version 12, I believe it said. That's been changed to be Azure SQL Database. So that's a little tweak there. So now we can go back and publish this again. And we'll go to edit, and we'll go to TimCo data. We hit OK, and we'll hit publish. And we'll see if this publishes for us. Wait for it and wait for it. It's going to take a little bit of time because it is going across the network, and this is the lowest grade of SQL Server. But it should be fairly quick once you have it set up. Okay, so all told, that took about 3 minutes and 35 seconds to complete. So now we have published our SQL database to the Azure SQL Database. So if I go to SQL Server Management Studio and I connect to the TimCo SQL server, so timcosql.database.windows.net, my login name, my password, which actually is a super secret password, and remember that, I hit connect. This will connect to my SQL Server. Again, you have to have that firewall open for this to work. But once it's open, then you can connect to it. Now I can go to my databases. I can open up my TimCo data, look at my tables, and note that my table list, once it pops up, will have all of my actual tables. There we go. So we have inventory, we have products, we have sale and sale detail, and user table. So all these are all set up for me to actually use for my API. Now my auth database is still going to be empty. It's going to have nothing in it. So that's because we haven't actually pushed our Entity Framework database to it. Okay? So this does mean, though, that we can administer this just like you would a local database. It's just that it's in Azure. So now we have those in place. The last thing I want to do is I do want to change my connection strings only for the connections in the cloud. So let's go back to our database here. Let's go to TimCo Data. Notice that compute utilization, it kind of pegged it out there for a little bit. That's because that was during the publish of the database. So we got connection strings here. Show database connection strings. Click on that. And it's going to give you a connection string. Now this is the really cool thing. It does show everything in here, including my username. That's TimCo admin. But then password, it has your password. That's obviously a clear text thing. So you don't want to show this to someone. So I'm going to copy this. I could hit copy right there. And then I'm going to off screen, I'm going to paste that to a notepad. And I'm going to replace your password with the actual password. I'm going to copy it again. All right. So now we have the connection string to the TimCo data. Well, how do we use TimCo data? Let's go back over here and go to our API. And in appsettings.json, we have the TRM data connection. That's what is going to be TimCo data. Therefore, if we set up a connection string for TRM data, we should be able to override this with what's on the server. So let's go to a TimCo API, and let's go to configuration. And under connection strings at the bottom, we'll say new connection string. And this is TRM data. And the value I'm going to paste in. But I'm going to do that off screen. I'm going to pause the screen when I do that. So I'll fill the other things out first. This is going to be a Azure SQL Database. I'm not going to use a deployment slot. This would be if you have, this only goes for, let's say, a staging slot or a pre-production slot. Slots are used as kind of staging grounds for your application before they go live. We're not going to use slots in this demonstration or even probably in the TimCo Retail Manager at all, or at least not for now, but that would be what that would be for. So I'm going to pause the video, I'm going to paste the value in here, and then I'm going to hit OK. Okay, so I have my connection string here. I'm going to hit save. This will restart your application. So if you save changes to your connection string, it will restart your application, your API. Now let's go back over to our dashboard again and go to TimCo auth. This will be very, very similar. If you go to connection strings, this connection string is practically identical to the other. The difference is it says for initial catalog, it says TimCo auth instead of TimCo data. Because remember, it's on the same SQL server, it's just a different database. So I hit copy on that, and then I'm going to come back over to my API. While I do that, I'll go into my notepad and actually put the value of that password. I'll recopy that. And I go back down to configuration. And this one, I believe, was default connection. Yep, default connection. That's our Entity Framework Database, I'm pretty sure. It says MS Local DB. I think that's the one. Yep, API auth DB is our database name. So default connections is when you want to overwrite. So we're going to come here and say new connection string, default connection, all one word. Change the type to be Azure SQL. And now I will pause the video. All right, I just pasted that in and hit OK. I'm going to save this now. This, again, will restart our API. Okay, that's been done. So now we can go back to our API. We can check this out by actually opening it up. And it should be that our API is back up and running. Wait for it in just a minute. Yeah, it's thinking about it. It takes a minute when you first load, what happens is it has to basically reinitialize some things. Once you load the first time, if I were to go back and load it again, it's much, much quicker. Notice how quick that was. So even if I close these out, by opening back up, it's practically instantaneous. It's just that initial time you open up your web application after you reload it. So the common thing to do after you do a deploy or after you do a change to your web applications is always go visit the page. That way it's slow for you and not your customer. So that way you can make sure it's working and then try it again and make sure you get this lightning quick response time. So now let's register a person. I'm going to register my Tim at iamtimcorey.com, my super secret password. Actually, I'm going to do a different one because I don't want this to be on the internet with people making changes to it. Okay, so register this. One non-alphanumeric character, of course. There we go. And now what's going to do is initialize our database. And it says, oh, nope, it can't initialize the database. No worries, we can do it from Visual Studio. Normally we'll do this from our deployment, but we'll do it inside of Visual Studio. So what we're going to do is we're going to change temporarily the value of our app settings, point to the actual database, and then do an update database. I'm going to do that off screen though, since again, I'm going to be pasting in secure information. This is what I don't like about Entity Framework is usually you're pasting in a username and password, and that's the full authentication. It's everything access. I like to have a lockdown access, but Entity Framework needs to do so much, you really can't lock it down. So there is a security, not an issue there. Well, it can be a security issue there. There is at least a security concern there. Okay, I'm going to paste this in temporarily, and then we'll do the update database. Okay, so now I update it and I close it. We can go to Package Manager console, and we should be able to say update database. And that should update our database for us. So it's updating now. It's pushing all the changes up to it. There's going to be a lot of changes just because it's going through those multiple steps, and it says it's done. Now let's go back to our authentication page, and we're going to hit refresh and say yes, continue. Since it's done the push, we've now registered because it did do that update database on our remote SQL server. So now I can click here to confirm our account, and now we have an account I can log into. So Tim at iamtimcorey, my actually secret password, and then I'll remember me, it's fine. We'll log in, and now it says it should recognize me. It didn't seem to. Let's try it again. Well, that's something to look into. It does say I'm logging in, but it's not giving me the ability to see that I'm logged in. It's not changing this value. That's just a fact we haven't changed this on our MVC page, but it is something to look into. I believe it's /swagger. Yep, there's our swagger. So now with this, we can look at our inventory, which of course we can't actually do a post or a get because this is protected. So it's going to give us an error saying that unauthorized, which is okay. That shows us that it's actually working. It's actually protecting our data. So now let's go to user and nope, let's go to actually token. Now it does, let's do a tryout. It does show the username and password in clear text. I'm not a big fan of that because then I have to paste that again on screen or just not show it to you. Not a big fan of that. So let's do this. Let me do it off screen. Just, and this is, grant type I believe is bearer. So let me paste my password in here, again off screen, and make sure it runs. So that worked. It's password for grant type, not bearer. I don't know what I was thinking. The grant type is password. You put your password in here, you execute. It gave me a 200 message, so it was working. So it does look like it is operational. It's just that there is that quirk on the login page where it's not actually changing our MVC site the way that we normally expect it to say, hi, Tim, I am Tim Corey, or something like that. But we don't typically log into the API itself, so it's a lower priority thing to fix. But this does appear to be working. So now one more thing, let's close this out, and we're going to go over to our solution here and just note that in the TimCo Auth database, we have the TimCo or ASP.NET users, which if I do a select, you'll note that there is my Tim at I am Tim Corey login name because I just created that account. Now we can take this ID, we can copy this, we can go over to our user table, and I can edit the top 200 rows. This just allows me to really quickly edit inline in a way that's easy to use. So once this pops up, I will paste in the ID. My first name is Tim, my last name is Corey, and my email address, tim@iamtimcorey.com, and create date should create for us. It does. So now I have that user, and now I will need to add some roles to that person in order to get set up. I believe we already have the roles in the database. We do not. Okay, so we'll need to make sure we trigger those to create the roles and then add that user to the user roles table. So we'll tackle that in a future video. That's more configuring our SQL servers after we have them set up. But that is a process you have to do every time you reset up a SQL server or those two SQL servers. Okay, now that's probably the only thing we only have to do that maybe once or twice. Normally, it'd only be if we're going to create a brand new database for some reason that we have to do that. So even our dev databases will probably pull from production and clean the database up and then create our dev database out of that. So I wouldn't anticipate we'd even ever create our dev databases from scratch. So just note that that is there, but it's not a big deal. Okay, so now our dashboard, we have our two databases. We have our API, and we have in our API the configuration that's pointing our connection strings to the right locations. So my connection string in Visual Studio is still the old connection string. Well, it's supposed to be, but I did make that one change, don't forget, in order to do the update database. So I'm going to right click on this and say undo, and I will undo the changes in that file. And now I can very safely open this on camera because it's the old settings that are just the local DB, nothing about the server. This will still run locally. And when we publish it, we're not changing anything here, and yet Azure does the work of replacing those connection strings securely. We could go the next level up and use Azure Key Vault, but I don't think we need to in this case. I think it's simple enough. This just works. So again, Azure can be really easy mode in a lot of cases. All right, so we have our API working. We now have our two databases published to and set up, and they're working with our API, and the API has connection strings. So we're all set now, so you can start doing a continuous integration process. And that's the next video in the series. We're going to set up our continuous integration where we will start doing this build for all of our projects, and then we will publish in continuous deployment. We're going to start publishing our API and our databases so we can keep those up to date as we make changes. The cool thing is we can point our WPF project to this API in Azure and start using that instead of our API locally if we want to. We probably won't for most cases. It'll be just for production that we'll use this, but it is nice we have that option. And the best part is it doesn't take any connection strings or security knowledge or anything. We just point to this API URL instead of the local API URL. So the user will still have to have a login and password on our API, but now there is no connection string to give them. There is no access to the database directly. They only go through the API, which is a lot better security than giving a WPF application direct access to your database. Okay? Put that API in the middle, and then you can secure that API a whole lot easier than you can secure a data access right from WPF. Okay? So that's the video for today. In the next video in this series, we're going to go ahead and set up our continuous integration process, which is that building every time we commit our code. Okay? So come on back for that. Thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.